Hi, Natasha. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your credentials?
Yeah, so I'm Natasha Muren, and I'm a mental health therapist based out of Utah, so licensed in Utah. And I've been a therapist for almost 20 years, which I don't think I've ever done that mental math, so that's a little scary. And I've had a private practice for about going on 14 years. And I specialize primarily in trauma work, trauma therapy, and couples therapy.
Wonderful. And you're also trained in EMDR.
Yeah. With some other models that I use, but that's definitely one of my preferred models, particularly in obviously working in trauma, doing trauma work, but actually it's really helpful for my couples as well.
So what is EMDR for those that don't know?
So EMDR is an acronym, and it stands for Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing. And the woman who sort of developed it, she actually later on said that she wished she would have called it adaptive information processing, because the eye movement part, which we can get into, it's not necessary. So it's any bilateral stimulation kind of does the job. So that's kind of in the nitty gritty of it, but kind of big picture of EMDR, it was a model developed to originally treat PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. Over the last 40 years or so, research shows that it's super helpful for depression, anxiety, substance abuse, sleep disorders. There's kind of a myriad of issues and diagnoses that it can be used for. When I talk about it, I primarily talk about it in terms of trauma and anxiety. And I use it at some point with my clients. Like I use it with all my clients at some point. And I think one of the things I want to impress upon the audience is it doesn't need to be what's called a big T trauma. And a big T, capital T trauma are the big ones: death, rape, abuse. It doesn't need to be capital T trauma. It can be little t trauma. And that is sort of like the everyday events in our lives that may have sort of shaped us and sort of gotten stuck. And we're struggling to sort of process through those issues. It's the understanding, or EMDR's sort of developed out of an understanding of how trauma and traumatic events are sort of recorded in our brain and our nervous system. So when a traumatic event happens, that information is stored in a memory, in a body sensation, in the area of our brains that identifies smell, touch, sound. And, for human beings, it's helpful to to be able to track, okay, that bad thing happened. That's important for me to remember that, and to know if something like that happens, what to do with it. And that's healthy processing. We learn from whatever happens to us. With trauma, though, trauma is tricky, where often, or what can happen when someone who's gone through a traumatic event, that information gets stored in such a way that it kind of gets stuck. And it becomes what we call maladaptive. And maladaptive basically means it's not useful, it's not accurate, and it's not current. So an example of that would be kind of the cliche example, but really demonstrates the what happens. So if a war veteran, when somebody's at war and they're around bombs and gunfire, that's, obviously a very traumatic event. And that information is stored. When they come home and they're at a 4th of July party and fireworks go off, that information gets triggered. And so although cognitively they understand they're not at war, that they're at a barbecue, they're safe, their bodies respond in such a way that make them feel very unsafe. They kind of can't control their responses, and they really may have a dramatic, they may be irritable, scared. There's all sorts of sleep disturbances that may come. Depression's huge. Same with like a person who's experienced a rape. There may be smells connected to that, maybe a cologne, a smell of a cologne, or, something in the environment. If they go into a mall and smell that cologne, they may have a traumatic response or an anxiety response based on information, old information. Mm-hmm. So EMDR works to help sort of reorganize the information. So the things that are necessary and the things that are helpful and adaptive, we get to hold on to. We can sort of keep ourselves safe or be able to sort of see danger out there. But it helps filter out things that are not useful and sort of, put us in a situation where, life can be pretty miserable if you're always feeling that fight, flight, or freeze response. So that's kind of the nitty gritty of kind of why it's useful for some of those symptoms.
And you mentioned bilateral stimulation. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is a little tricky to describe. So what we understand about EMDR or adaptive information processing is that the phenomenon, so it's a little bit like REM sleep. We think that it's sort of mimicking REM sleep. So REM sleep is the stage in our sleep where we are dreaming, usually, whether you remember it or not. And the analogy I use for REM sleep and bilateral stimulation is it's kind of like, when everybody leaves Target for the end of the night and they're the workers there that stay for the night shift, and they're restocking, moving things, reorganizing, getting rid of old stuff, getting rid of the produce that's old. So that's kind of what REM sleep does for us, that it really filters out information through the day and it's just not useful. So it's not like we forget what has happened, the day before, or it's not like the problem goes away, but our experience about it is, usually we're a little bit more clear-headed about it. It's kind of where that phrase, just go sleep on it, came from. We're a little bit more clear-headed about like, okay, what do I want to do with this? So bilateral stimulation, let me talk a little bit about how you achieve that. So eye movement is one of it. So when you're in a EMDR session, the clinician may literally have you move your eyes back and forth. And so that's one way to achieve bilateral stimulation. And that's kind of the most obvious way that it's replicating REM. But we now know that bilateral touch, so a clinician may tap on you or may have you tap on yourself. Or I use these things called TheraTappers, and they pulsate. Walking, just a walk is bilateral stimulation. Yoga, that's another, we know that body movement that really just use both sides of the hemisphere is stimulating that bilateral stimulation. And what we're finding with that is the bilateral stimulation activates the fight, flight, or freeze areas of the brain, or the sympathetic nervous system. So where talk therapy really stays up here in the frontal lobe. When someone's talking about an event or talking about issues in their life, it's super helpful, really, really helpful. But it's a little bit more of the storytelling part of the experience. And you can get great insight out of that. But when someone's in fight or flight, that's a whole nother part of the brain that's activated. And talk therapy really is limited in addressing that part of the brain. So EMDR does that. And so when you're in an EMDR session, you're actually not talking very much at all. I'm definitely not talking a lot, and the client is not talking a whole lot. They're going through a process of whether it's eye movement or tapping or even sound. Some of my clients prefer that they wear earphones and it just kind of bings. And so that is activating the sympathetic nervous system. And so they're sort of recalling whatever the event is or the sort of situation that they're trying to process. And what you see is the sympathetic nervous system just kind of go, I don't want to, paint a perfect picture. Sometimes it escalates in the session for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it will go up because you're recalling, you know, a traumatic event.
Yeah.
But over time and over the session, and obviously several sessions, you're really seeing the nervous system come down. And that's where the D comes in, and the EMDR is the desensitization. So the goal is, and what you see is, someone will, obviously the memory is that you're not forgetting what happened. Your experience in remembering what happened or getting triggered, sometimes it's not a memory at all. I actually work with clients who don't have specific memories of their trauma, but they are triggered and they have a sense of it. So it's not like your memory of the event is gone. It's that your response and your body response to the event and to the memory comes down, and you're not activated and you're not thrown into a fight, flight, or freeze response. And then the cognition, then the sort of healthy thinking really can thrive. So, you know, when I know it's time to do EMDR with my clients, or recommend EMDR to be done with a client, is when a client is saying things like, you know, I know I'm okay. I know I'm safe. Or I know I shouldn't feel this way anymore, but I do, and I can't control it. Like, but I still feel agitated, or I still feel upset, or I still feel fearful. And that's when I know the thinking brain is fine. This part of the brain knows that they're okay, but their body does not. And so that's when that would be a perfect time to bring in the EMDR.
I love that you brought that up, because it's so important to know, especially for clients, when is it a good time to start EMDR? And I'm wondering, is that the goal of EMDR, to change the relationship to the traumatic event? Is that what you would say the goal is?
Totally. So I would say two things. It's the body, three things, I guess. The body sensation. So literally, like the anxious feelings, or the heart palpitations, or the fleeing or fighting, or actually a lot of my clients, that's why I say freeze. Freeze, when I say freeze response, I mean the shutting down, deer in the headlights, numb, dissociative, and actually most of my clients have a lot of shame around that. They have shame around the fact that when something bad happened to them, they did nothing. And that's a lot of, so we have to unwind. So again, we're shifting the body sensation, we're shifting the emotion about it, maybe shame, depression, fear, and then the thinking about it. So clients that I've worked with, it's almost like when they're picturing what happened, or, sometimes it's a prolonged event, but when they're picturing the event, all of a sudden it's like they're like a different camera angle comes at them. And all of a sudden they can see a whole new part of the story that is really important. I couldn't get away. There was nobody to talk to. Something like that, where that maybe they forgot or didn't sort of know that part. But so exactly what you're saying. It changes the relationship to the story and to the event.
Yeah, definitely shifting the narrative. And can anyone do EMDR? What type of training did you need to go through in order to be able to provide EMDR? And if someone's looking for an EMDR therapist, what are important questions to ask?
So to be trained, and to be honest, it was so long ago, maybe some of the requirements have changed. I don't think so. I actually popped on the EMDRIA, and I'll give you a few resources at the end. But EMDRIA, EMDRIA.org, is the International Association of EMDR Therapists and Training. And so I jumped on and tried to look at if the training has changed. I don't believe it has. So it has to be a master's level clinician. So psychologist, family therapist, social worker. It has to be at least a master's level. And the process for me, they kind of do it differently depending how you want to do it. The way I did it was over a course of a year, and it was 2 pretty long, I think 4-day trainings, where you're getting really the information. But probably the most helpful part is in between the basic and the advanced training, you have to get about 40 hours of in-person. You have to be doing the sessions, and you have to be working with a consultant. So an EMDR certified consultant. And so I'm, during that course of time, I was bringing to a group and individually to this consultant, bringing all these cases to them. So it's, rest assured, if your clinician, your therapist is trained, they've been trained well. I felt really good about the training that I received and what's expected in becoming a EMDR therapist. In terms of finding an EMDR therapist, EMDRIA, you can go on and say, find a therapist, and it will give you a list of clinicians that have been trained or certified. Also, even just, I think if you just Google EMDR, or Psychology Today actually is another great resource. It's basically the dating site for a therapist. You put your profile on as a therapist, what you specialize in, and it allows you to specifically find EMDR therapists. So yeah, it's it should not be hard to find in even I would say smaller areas and more remote areas. For sure, it's hard to come by, but in any significant sized town, you should be able to find a therapist that would be able to do it.
And can you provide EMDR over Zoom?
Yeah, so it's tricky. It was a learning curve for sure with COVID. Yeah, so there's you can literally do this with your client. I can't use some of my gizmos anymore because obviously I can't do it virtually, but you can actually, there's an app called BST, and you can actually have your client download the app, and it's use your earphones, and again, it's that pinging, and I'm telling them kind of like what to set it at, and then I'm telling them when to stop it. So that's part has been really important through COVID, and now actually all my sessions are virtual still, so it's luckily we can still do it. I also teach my clients how to, obviously they're not doing the full EMDR protocol, but the bilateral stimulation they can definitely do on their own for themselves. And that's why, I love what you're doing, where, yoga is like the best bilateral stimulation. Pilates is the best, walking. If I get a client to walk, we're good. We're great. Yeah. So, you could definitely, your clinician can help you sort of do it on your own. Obviously, you're not doing proper EMDR, but, getting the benefits of the nervous system being calmed down.
Yeah, implementing the different principles is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else you think the audience should know?
Yeah, so I wanted to give just the audience a few resources that they can look up. I already mentioned EMDRIA. There's also 2 books that I think they're game changers and life changers for most people. One is called What Happened to You? And he makes the distinction, the author, Dr. Bruce Perry, he makes the distinction of stop asking people what's wrong with you and start to understand what happened to you. And it's so it's a book definitely about trauma. That's a great resource. The other book that I love and how I got introduced to EMDR was The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. and then also some EMDR specific things that you can do at home. There's bilateral stimulation music. My husband's a therapist too, and we're big bike riders, and he just for the fun of it, he just like puts the music on while he's listening to his bike, and it's music, but it's sort of going through both ear and he swears that it improves his performance on his bike.
Wow.
The other one is, it's called Touch Point Solutions. And this is really exciting because some of the tools I use weren't I would have to purchase it, and the general public wouldn't be able to. But this company, basically, they've made little bracelets that you put on your wrist, and they vibrate.
Oh.
And I have a client using that right now, and she swears by it.
Okay.
And really, again, to help the nervous system, to help calm. Again, you're not doing EMDR, but it's definitely stimulating that bilateral stimulation. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Yeah.
Yes. And I'll include all of that information in the description below, along with a little bit more information about Natasha. And I just want to thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Michelle.
And for you at home, if you haven't yet subscribed to Mind and Body Pilates, a wellness approach, please do so by clicking on the logo below so that you don't miss out on any future interviews and Pilates classes. And thank you.